certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
According to the state's expert, police garments are not the source of fibres found on Jane Rimmer or Ciara Glennon. It's day 78 of Claremont in Conversation. Good to be with you. Natalie Bonjolo, Tim Clark and Emily Moulton joining you today. So day 8 in the stand for Rees Powell. And Tim, today was very interesting, not because of the fibres that matched, but because of those that didn't.
Yeah, that's right, Nat. We touched on this a little bit, or in a bit of a preview as to what we thought might come after the critical fibres, and thankfully we now are after the critical fibres because we did finish them today. And this was testing that the Chem Centre did in terms of eliminating potential sources rather than all the testing they did to try and find them. And they included many, many items of a personal nature from both Ciara and Jane and their lives. And it also included other possible sources that could conceivably have come into contact with both Jane and Ciara and those personal items and the crime scenes themselves. And so we got the full list of those today. And some of them you would think of, and maybe some of them you wouldn't have thought of immediately, but they were on there as well.
So what were some of the things on the list in terms of the police uniforms, Em?
Well, there's things like the overalls that they wore at crime scenes. Like I think we heard there was like dark overalls as well as light blue overalls. The other thing I thought was strange was the epaulets, which they're like, I guess they're the little things that they sit on the shoulder, I guess, to show whatever rank you are. And then things like a baseball cap and some like badges as well, which were attached to fabric, which I thought was a strange thing as well to sort of include. And then there's the standard things, like what they wore as like in terms of uniform, like a jumper and like booties, like you would sort of hear at the crime scene. But yeah, those other things from the police, I thought they were quite, just they tested. It sounded like they just tested absolutely anything that was blue, and obviously to compare to the blue fibres that were found both on all three victims. And
the items that they tested, are they old items from back in the 90s, or are they from current uniform supplies?
A bit of both. I think some they gave us dates and some they didn't. So sometimes they'll say, like in terms of some overalls, like they'll give a date from 2010 until recently. So the type of overalls that the police still currently use, probably the forensic overalls or coveralls that they use when they go to crime scenes as well, like and the booties, the forensic booties, I assume that they now wear. I think only at the time, I think it was just when we heard in evidence from the various forensic officers, they said that booties were just being used or starting to be used, I think in 97. I think only a few of them actually used them, but they were some of the things that they referred to.
Yeah. I wonder, Tim, if people may think that sort of diminishes the significance of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, but it's obviously the question that they had to ask themselves, as we touched on before, because the prosecution probably knew a little bit of what was coming. We say the fibres come from this source. Presumably the other side are going to suggest they come from the other source. So we'll try and think of all the potential sources we can before they get there. And there were, I mean, as Em said, there were dozens and dozens, sort of anything blue, anything fibre that could have possibly shed. And even Mr. Powell admitted himself today, the badges, for instance, he said, oh, look, we were almost certain they weren't going to be, but A, it was handy to have them in the database to start with, and B, we just wanted to cover off that track, and then all the forensic gear as well, and then all the state mortuary gear as well. That was all tested, including all the different towels, and so I mean, you can see how they've managed to get it to the amount of fibres they have. 10,500, I think, was the estimate directly pointing to macro or the macro investigation, because they have literally gone over everything they possibly could think of that might have come into contact with Jane and Ciara. And then you've got all the stuff that they found on Jane and Ciara, which today we learned was nearly 3,500 fibres itself. And then all the different cars, and we got that list today as well, which was upwards of S70, I think, models dating back from 89 right through.
Yeah, 124, I think it was, 124 cars.
124 different cars, and then all the different swatches, all the different fibre samples from inside all of those cars as well. So, yeah, staggering amount of work's been done by Chem Centre. You've got to say that. Just a staggering amount of work, which correlates with the staggering amount of time that Mr. Powell's been talking about it, 8 days and counting.
That's right. I mean, that's how you can get to these 20,000 fibres, like you've said. Now, the other thing that Mr. Powell ticked off on this list was carpet fibres from the Continental Hotel. Did any of those match the critical fibres?
No, they basically tested, I think it was the second floor carpet from the Continental Hotel, because obviously all three, 4 victims really, if you include the Carrick victim, were all meant to be at the Continental. But one of the things I think from people that were with Ciara on the night she disappeared was that her jacket was left on the floor. I don't know if people remember that, but I guess that would be one of the reasons as well why they wanted to test that area, but also because they're there. But I can't recall if her jacket was actually found, but then she might have put it back on, because I think there was different witnesses who said they saw her with a jacket around her waist or a jacket on when they saw her sort of walking up and down Sterling Highway. So, so they've obviously tested the Continental Hotel carpet as well as the homes of both the Glennons and Jane's apartment on Cambridge Street.
Yeah, and you heard also today about the items that were taken from Ciara and Jane's homes and also their workplaces, and these were also tested for fibres.
Yeah, they were, Nat, and there was some very, very personal items. Hairbrushes were first and foremost. We had scrunchies and hair ties, clothes, obviously, carpets of Ciara's office, for instance, the chair in her office, her diary, which had a fabric cover on it, and even a toy rabbit that was evident at the home, and obviously being having been made of fibre. They had to test it just to make sure. Now, I mean, these are twofold. Obviously, they were looking for DNA, particularly in the hairbrushes, because from memory they used some of the hair samples to actually get exemplar DNA of Jane and Ciara, but also they were looking for these fibres. And as you asked and as Em answered, none of these critical fibres, or none of fibres like these critical fibres, were found on any of these items. And so what the prosecution will say, obviously, is, well, these are all items that were in the possession of both Jane and Ciara before they were murdered, and there's no Telstra Navy fibres there, there's no grey polyester fibres from the Holden Commodore there, and there's no Telstra fibres from the boot carpet or from the cabin carpet on any of these items that were left behind on the nights that both girls died. But yet, when their bodies are found, 55 days for Jane and 19 days later for Ciara, these fibres are there. So, I mean, that's the critical point of all that evidence, is that they weren't there pre-murder and they were there post-murder.
And you're talking, of course, about all 98 critical fibres. So really what you're saying is none of them match to anything in their day-to-day lives prior to their murders, or, from police worker uniforms or anything like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And from all those different sources. So we're talking the pub, the cars, the houses, the apartments, the offices, down to Una Glennon's sewing kit was tested, and the materials that she used to make toys, everything that they could conceivably think that that might have shed a fibre, and it even got down to the detail of the zipper on the body bag that was used to transport Ciara from Eglinton to the state mortuary. Even the fibres that were inside that zipper were tested to make sure that they could not have come from anywhere else. And so that's the level of detail, that's the level of thought, and that's why it's, as we've said so many times, it's taken so long, but it is so important because now the prosecution can definitely say those fibres, the grey, the blue grey, the blue, the light grey and the dark grey, and the non-delustered rayon. That's Emily's personal favourite, I think.
I love typing that out all the time.
None of those were present on anything that the police searched that belonged to the women before the nights they were killed.
Wow, I mean, my goodness, the thoroughness is really absolutely staggering. And it is so very scientific. It was interesting today, you heard about this idea of sheddability and how long fibres can remain, maybe on a body, for instance, in the elements. What did Mr. Powell have to say about that?
He basically said that, like, when they were talking about sheddability, they carried out their own tests on it. So I think when we heard a lot of evidence from the fabric experts a couple of weeks ago, in quite a lot of detail about how garments can, if rubbed up against each other, can transfer fibres, or if pressure's put on a garment, it can transfer fibres depending on what that fabric is made from. So we're saying that the Chem Centre carried out a test on the grey seat insert from the Holden VS Commodore that was driven by Mr. Edwards when he worked for Telstra, as well as the Telstra pants. So that test that they carried out, they basically used a white lab coat and sort of what he said was a medium hand pressure sort of went over, I did one pass over the car fabric. And so that what they found from that was that 430 grey polyester fibres were recovered from the various tape lifts from the coat. So the grey polyester fibres, 20 of them were found in Jane Rimmer's hair. And so then the other part to that was when he was talking about how long fibres can remain on a body or in hair. He just said, like, obviously, if a body is in the elements, exposed to the elements, obviously the retention of fibres becomes less. But he said it was possible for a significant number of fibres to be retained. And he sort of cited a number of forensic scientific papers on this. I think in one study or paper, he said there was something like 29 days or something from one, I don't know, Tim, if you quite remember, from one case where... Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So there was one case cited in a research journal that showed that in one particular homicide victim, a fibre was able to endure in her hair, or in their hair, I should say, for 29 days post-mortem, which is longer than would be in Ciara's case, but a lot shorter than it would be in Jane's case. Yeah. And there are various other cases, and I pointed to one last week, that Dr. Ray Palmer, who's our next witness, or next expert fibre witness, this Suffolk Strangler case in the UK, again, where fibres endured on these victims for a long time in the elements, and were found to match the eventual convicted killer. So, and I'm pretty much certain that the Operation Macro will now be cited in various forensic journals for years to come. Given the amount of detail and the amount of work that's gone into it, I'm pretty sure in the world of criminal fibre evidence, this is going to become a very, very researched case.
I think you might be right. And Mr. Powell, he did actually finish up with those remaining 4 critical fibres, the last 4 that we hadn't talked about. So just tell us about those last 4. These are from the car vacuumings?
Yes, and again, we've talked about these fibres as if they're really easy to spot. And we saw a picture today of the petri dish that just some of these vacuums was placed in. Now, if you can imagine, if you hadn't cleaned your car from 1997 to 2016, I reckon that's what the bottom of your car might look like, and that is what Rees Powell and his colleague had to go through fibre by fibre, item by item. There was stuff as big as a paper clip. But then these 4 tiny fibres were almost invisible to the naked eye. But however they did it, they found them. So they vacuumed the bottom of the car basically from back to front, back seat first, and then in the front, and then the filters that were in these vacuums, special vacuums, which include filter paper, were then taken out. They were sealed, taken to the Chem Centre lab, reopened. The debris spilled out into these petri dishes, split up, and then looked at. And it took days and days and days again to go through it. And what they found after all that work were 4 fibres, all blue polyester, all said to come from either the Telstra pants or the Telstra shorts, and all eventually compared to the other critical fibres of a blue hue over the case. Some were said to be similar, and some were said to be correspond, which was as close as a perfect match as you can get. So we finished there. There was a bit of a sigh of relief. I bumped into Miss Barbara Gallo at the break, and she was expecting a standing ovation when she got to the end of the 98, but she didn't get. Crickets was a quote to me that she thought, but I think everyone was very silently pleased to have reached that little milestone. But as I've said, Mr. Powell is still going and will still be going tomorrow, and beyond.
Possibly Tuesday.
Possibly Tuesday, but he is nearly there. We have a quick question before we go from Andrew regarding the Chem Centre's attempts to obtain adventitious samples of historical police coveralls from the Police Museum to rule out contamination fibre sources in the Claremont case. Does the Chem Centre now proactively seek adventitious samples to add to their fibre database from the police service any time that the manufacturer or design of police issue garb is changed? Do they seek to partner with large manufacturers of fabric to obtain samples at time of production? Well, that might be a question for Brendan.
Well, it might be, but I mean, we touched on it, and on this mega spreadsheet that we've all been studying for the past 2 weeks, we got there today, and we saw, as we've just discussed, the amount of items and details of police uniforms that they've tested in this macro case. But the point being, once they're on the database, they're on the database and clearly marked, clearly sourced. And so when it comes to any other case in the future, when they run those comparison MSPs, those fibres will be in there to compare to. So it's not like they will just discard these fibres. They're on the slides and they're on the database forever. In terms of manufacturers, well, we've heard, haven't we, about how they've sourced. They went to Holden, for instance, to specifically ask for the trims and swatches and things of the cars that they were searching for, and we've heard from Holden employees a couple of weeks ago to say they were quite happy to supply them. So there is a level of cooperation, certainly with car manufacturers, and so I'm pretty sure if someone of Mr. Powell's expertise came knocking on your door and saying, we're investigating a murder, would you mind helping us with your swatches? I'm pretty sure everyone would be happy to cooperate.
That's right.
I think it's, with that database as well, like, there was like 3,600 fibres relating to Operation Ambrose, the investigation to Gerard Ross's murder. So I think earlier in the trial at some point that they said when they were compiling this database, they sampled a lot of random things as well, because at that point in time they had no source material to compare things to, so they were just trying to think of anything they could. So I don't know what their process is, but I'm assuming that they would go to the manufacturers of different sorts of fabrics, not just police, but any sort of manufacturers, I guess, that supplies, I guess, chairs for government buildings or schools or things like that as well, just so that they've got samples to compare things to.
That's right. And I guess it can only be a good thing, right, if they're,
absolutely.
that database grows over the years.
Yeah, my understanding as well is that in some cases they even ask other staff members and family of staff members if they're looking for a certain colour of fibre, for instance, a red or a pink, that they will just basically ask anyone they know, any clothing of a red or pink hue, would you mind bringing it in so we could get a sample of it? I mean, I think it does get to that broader spectrum because, any fibre is better than no fibre in the database, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Powell with a pair of tweezers having a go at the court carpet after he finished his evidence tomorrow, just to take a memento of his momentous effort.
Yeah, incredible focus and dedication from Mr. Powell, I think. Well, as Tim already correctly calculated, you suggested at the start of the week, Tim, that Mr. Powell would finish giving his evidence on Friday, and it looks like that is exactly what will happen.
Well, evidence in chief, at least. Yeah. Now, he's still got his cross-examination to go. Yeah. But yes, Miss Barbara Gallo will get to sit down tomorrow for the first time in 2 weeks. I'm sure her feet and calves will forgive her as well. But so we'll get through Mr. Powell's evidence in chief tomorrow. Cross-examination will start. Mr. Jovich indicated today that will probably go for more than a few hours. So the likelihood is we will see Mr. Powell for one more time on Tuesday after the long weekend, and then we think now that Mr. Dr. Ray Palmer, won't start giving his evidence until Wednesday. So that's going to mean me and Em and our colleagues having a late night on Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. So I'll look forward to that.
It's a big week next week. Well, we will be back for all of that, and we will be back tomorrow. Thank you both for your hard work. Tim and Em, thank you so much for your dedication with the Daily Blog, keeping everyone across those minute details day in, day out. You also have the focus and dedication of Rees Powell on your side as well. Thanks for your company. I hope to have you back tomorrow for day 79 of Claremont in Conversation.
This podcast is hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au. And if local news delivered differently appeals to you, tune into WA's newest morning show, The West Live with Jenna Clark. It's talkback radio, but without the interruptions. Listen live weekdays from 8:45 a.m. on thewest.com.au or catch up with the podcast.